Okay, so you may have seen my other video where I was talking about how this is the most hardcore mud ATV of all time, and I definitely stand by that. It's the most hardcore, but I don't have one, and there's a couple of good reasons for that. This bike has some serious drawbacks. Oh, excuse me, this quad has some serious drawbacks. I don't even want to have to cry in the comments about that. There's better things to cry about. We're going to get to them. This is my buddy Richard's bike, so I hate to roast his new machine, but there are a few weak points on this machine and a few downsides. I'm going to start with the ones that are most important to me. So the biggest thing for me I don't like the front differential. It's not a selectable differential. It's an all-wheel drive unit. It's called a Hillard, and it used to be very problematic. They used to like break in half at the pinion. Polaris has upgraded that, but you can see that the splines are exposed there on that U-joint, and it's kind of a high maintenance unit. There's a lot of wear that happens in there because there's these roller bearings and one-way clutch type things. The splines rust and wear out. But the biggest thing for me is you don't have a selectable locker. You have two-wheel drive and you have all-wheel drive. This is really all-wheel drive. What it means is four-wheel drive automatic diff lock. It locks in when you need it. It works great. It is true four-wheel drive, unlike Visco lock, but I'd much prefer this setup where I have two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, front diff lock. The Pioneer also has a similar thing. I like the selectability. So this works good. It just doesn't give you all the modes that I want. The second thing I don't like about this machine is that it's got a very tall engine. So it has this part of it right here that hangs down pretty low. That's like, I think it's your oil filter access, but you have a big metal beam here that hangs down a lot lower than your front and rear diffs. So the bottom of this machine is actually kind of curved. I'm not sure if you can see it there. Yeah, you can see it. So its ground clearance right here is kind of poor, which gives it kind of a bad breakover angle. So when you climb out of holes a lot, it gets stuck right here, bellies out, and kind of turtles. That drove me nuts with mine. Once I lifted it a bunch, put raked arms and 34s, it had so much clearance it didn't matter. But from the factory, that was kind of annoying. Another thing, just to talk about things I don't really love, this rear diff isn't the most waterproof, and neither is this rear shaft. So again, the splines are exposed. On the front of it there's no O-ring to keep the grease on the splines, and you have to grease those splines a lot or they'll be problematic. Same thing with the splines right here going to the front drive shaft. I know it's kind of hard to see, but those splines get rusty quickly. Sometimes there's a grease zerk on that U-joint so you can pump the splines full of grease. If you mud and water ride a lot, which you're going to with a Highlifter factory snorkel machine, you got to grease those splines a lot. Those are like the real major downsides. Also, it's a very heavy machine. I don't know the exact weights because manufacturers lie like crazy, especially Can-Am and Polaris. They post a dry weight that's usually a couple 100 pounds off. But I can tell you that having this Can-Am in the mini truck, which is supposed to be about 1,000 pounds, it bottoms out. It doesn't bottom out the rear suspension. This thing bottoms out my rear suspension. So definitely heavier than my Can-Am. Now a lot of that weight, probably 70, 80 pounds of that weight is just these really heavy Outlaw 2s, but it's a very heavy machine to begin with. Another thing that is kind of a buzzkill, but works okay. The transmission unit in this thing is not my favorite. So it uses a wild transmission that's derived from like an old diesel Ranger. So it sits right here between the belt housing and the engine, and this gives you your park, low, reverse, high, range, all that. It's got two chains in it. It has a drive chain and a reverse chain. I don't like chains. They add some extra backlash to the Driveline, and they also, if you get water in them, they can be problematic. Also, the mechanism that hooks to here is this weird wheel thing that sometimes snaps off, and people have been having problems with it since 2016, and that's when this Highlifter came out. And Highlifter has not updated the part in there, so you got to be careful when you're shifting them. They have take a lot of pressure to shift, but you can't force them because what holds those detents is this big wheel sprag thing. It can actually break, so you got to be careful shifting it. Don't love that. So the transmission is a little goofy. Power comes out of the engine, passes through the transmission, through some idler gears, into the belt box. So in the bottom clutch is your primary, comes up the belt to the secondary, goes into the transmission here, and then comes out to these crazy drive shafts. So I just don't love the Driveline. It is a fairly outdated design. It's been around, I think, since like the 550. The first 850 came out in like 2008 or something. And then in 2016, they made the Highlifter. The Highlifter has got very few updates since 2016. The styling facelift that all the other Sportsmen got, it did not get. So one thing that would really be good to improve on is these headlights. They could put an LED unit that wouldn't stick back so far, which would let you run a different shock and get some more suspension travel. Because right now, if you put a regular shock on here, the tire will come up and hit your headlight wires and stuff. So one good mod is to put LEDs here, and then you can get more suspension travel. That brings me on to the last thing I don't like about this machine. It has very limited suspension travel. A regular Sportsman has like 10.5 inches in the front, and I think, or in the rear, and 9 inches of travel in the front. This has like 6 in the rear and like 7 in the front. I'm just guessing. It's something around that. You gotta look at the spec sheet. The suspension travel is extremely limited on this machine, especially in the rear. So we'll be putting some regular Sportsman XP shocks on this to improve the ride quality. I took it out today and it does ride pretty rough. Even with the preload maxed out, coming off of water wheelies, I was bottoming out the front end. It almost threw me over the handlebars. There's a lot of good things about this bike, as we talked about in the other video. Those are the bad things. One other minor gripe is the turning radius is terrible, and you know, as to be expected from something that has limited steering travel for big tires. And this front bumper on the 1000 sticks out pretty far. So if you're putting in the bed of a pickup truck, it is a back window smasher. Of course, you could take that off or just buy the 850 if you're cheap like me. But it is a good machine. You just got to stay on top of your maintenance, keep all the water out of your gearboxes, and you know, it's very potent. It's got extremely low gears, and it comes on the most aggressive tires you can get on a stock machine. I mean, this thing will smoke any stock Can-Am if the Can-Am is still on its factory tires. That's a fact. However, if you threw those tires on this Can-Am, it would be lighter, it would have more suspension travel, and it would have better ground clearance because the engine's a little more compact and doesn't hang down quite as far. But that's just my 2 cents. Oh, one other complaint. This thing is pretty slow even in high range. The high range gearing, I think, is too low. They did that to keep it from burning belts if you're going to put it in low range. But with my Highlifter, actually, I put Sportsman XP high range gears in it so I could cruise and turn less RPMs on the trail. Okay, I swear I'm done griping. I know that was a lot. Let me know if I forgot anything in the comments below.